How's everyone doing today? This is Noah with the Life of the Zigs, coming back at you with another video on how to maintenance your portable generator. So let's get started. Alright, so to perform this maintenance, you're going to need some parts. You're going to need a oil filter. I have a Generac GP1500, so I went with the Generac made oil filter that they make. I got this on Amazon, and I'll link it down in the description below. Next thing you're going to need is fuel filters. I got a 2-pack on Amazon. They are Generac brand. However, these will work for any generator as well. Next thing you'll need is some spark plugs. These are kind of specific to the engine you have in your generator, so make sure look that up in your owner's manual. Next thing you'll need is oil. I need 5W30. That works for my engine. Just again, take a look in your owner's manual and see what it requires. And then one thing that's kind of specific to my generator is clamps for the fuel lines. Mine have crimped connections, so I need to cut those off and use those compression clamps. And last but not least, a way to get the spark plugs out. Alright, so the first step, what I did in the maintenance, is remove the spark plugs. This is really easy. You slide that socket on there, slide that metal bar in place, and turn. Once you get that loose, you just can hand turn that all the way out. One thing you want to check is make sure that they're the same exact plugs and they match each other, which holding them up close, they did. You can also see the wear and tear on the one versus the new one. Another thing you want to do as well is check the gap of your spark plugs. They are pre-gapped, however, I always like to double check and make sure they're right there. Once that's checked, slap it back in the hole and screw it in hand tight. Once it's hand tight, put your socket back on there and give it a couple cranks to where it's nice and snug. And don't forget to reattach the wire. That will also be the same process for the other side, so I won't show you that. The next step here is to change the oil. These Generac generators have a nice line coming off the bottom of the engine to where it drains out the oil. As you can see, I'm unscrewing the cap there and it's just dripping out. It does drain pretty slow because of that. However, as long as you open that cap on the top and take the filter off, it'll drain out within 10 minutes. When it comes to removing the oil filter, just use any oil filter wrench. The one I have here is like pliers, and they have some nice teeth on them to get a good grip and spin it off. And once you have it loose, just hand turn it off. Now it's time to put that new filter back on. I always take a little oil and rub it around that gasket there to make sure it doesn't dry out. Then you just screw it back on by hand and make sure you crank it down nice and tight. I also like to date my oil filters, as this just reminds me the last time I maintenance the engine. Now that the oil was all drained out, I recapped that drain line and tucked it back up into place. Now I needed to fill it back up with oil. Like I said, mine takes 5W30 full synthetic, slightly under 2 quarts with the oil filter change. Again, just refer to your owner's manual to see exactly how much your engine needs. And always make sure to check your dipstick and make sure that that oil is at the appropriate level and nice and full. And don't forget to put your fill cap back on. One thing you always want to make sure to check as well is your air filter. You don't always need to replace this, especially if you don't run it a lot. On the Generacs, it's very easy. As you can see, you just lift that cover off after taking the 2 bolts out and then unscrew the one wing nut that is holding the air filter in place. Now that the air filter's out, check everything over, make sure it all looks nice and clean. I decided to put a foam cover over it. It just helps protect that air filter itself more, and if stuff gets dirty, it's usually just that green foam filter, and it could just be rinsed off and put back on. Once that's done, slide that air filter back into place, put that wing nut back on, put the cover on, and then screw in those 2 bolts. The last step here was replacing that fuel filter. I purposely saved this for last as I knew it was going to be the most difficult. I tried attacking it with my pliers and my wire cutters, however I wasn't able to break that metal by doing so. So then I decided to use my multi-tool with a metal blade, and this worked out fairly well. However, you need to be extremely careful not to cut into the fuel filter or the line or rub on anything, as obviously heat and fuel don't mix well. Once I cut most of the way through, I used some needle nose pliers and some flathead screwdrivers to loosen up that clamp and then slide it back so I could get that fuel filter out of there. One thing I always like to do when pulling a fuel filter apart is wear gloves, and also make sure that you have your fuel tank shut off. You are still going to have some fuel dripping out of places, so make sure there's a catch pan or something underneath so you don't make a mess. Once that was done, I started attacking the other side with a flathead screwdriver and again the multi-tool, which I was finally able to get the fuel filter out. Once those old crimp clamps were off and the fuel filter was out, I used those nice compression clamps to slide back on with a pair of channel locks, and then slid the fuel filter on, and then repeated the process for the other side. And next time I need to change this fuel filter, all I need to do is take a pair of channel locks, crimp down those clamps, and slide them off. Once all the maintenance is complete, the last thing you want to do is start it up and run it for a few minutes just to make sure that everything's working fine and the maintenance you did it right. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned a lot as I did through this process. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.